to the Paperboyz. I'm Courier Sports Editor Doug Newhoff. To my left is Assistant Sports Editor Jim Sullivan, and we're joined by sports writers Nick Pateros to my right and Jim Nelson to my far right. I wish we had another month of summer, but unfortunately we don't. Football season's here, so we have a lot of things to talk about. Let's talk first of all about the two major college games, season openers this Saturday. Iowa hosts Illinois State, and UNI travels to Iowa State for a 7 p.m. night game. Let's start with the UNI-Iowa State game. I kind of broke it down, and I have three maybe keys to the game, in my opinion. Bounce them around, see what you guys think about them. But one thing I think UNI's done in recent meetings with Iowa State is they've created mismatches, and then they've done a really good job of exploiting those. Of course, it helps when you've got somebody as talented as David Johnson to create those mismatches. So, he had 4 touchdowns, almost 200 yards rushing, and 41 receiving yards in 2013 when UNI went down there and won. And then in 2011, I guess he would have been a freshman, but he made an impact on that game as well with a long touchdown catch and a couple of touchdowns. So what do you guys think? Where can the Panthers find those mismatches this season? Who are the guys that might step up and fill that role?
That's a very good question, because I'm sure that Joe Davis might be asking himself that very same thing right now. And that's the interesting part of it. They don't have that that's really obvious. One that might be able to do it is Dries Fountain, the sophomore wide receiver. He's the best of what they have, so he's a possibility. In the backfield, could it be Savon Huggins? Possibly, but we haven't seen him yet. We don't know what he can do. Could it be one of the quarterbacks? Well, maybe, but we haven't seen what they could do either. So a lot's going to depend, the matchup's going to depend on a lot of decisions that are made this week, if they haven't already made them. And no one will know exactly what can be exploited until they get out in the field Saturday night.
With this style of offense, maybe it's not as important that you create mismatches because you're coming at them from so many different directions.
That's certainly true. And in one way, you can find them if you follow the philosophy of being able to move guys around in multiple spots. For instance, they could flank Darian Willer out wide sometimes. If Iowa State chooses to cover him with, let's say, a linebacker, that's advantage UNI. So there are ways to create mismatches, through Joe Davis' system. One other thing that could happen here is on the defensive side, what can UNI do, to slow down Iowa State? And in the past, a big key has been the pass rush. 2 years ago when they played, they were able to force Sam Richardson out of the pocket, get some pressure on him, and shut down that part of the passing game. And that may be more important than ever, given the caliber of Iowa State's receivers.
Yeah, very good point. That was the second key on my list, is whether or not UNI can get some pressure on Richardson. Because I think, from what I've seen, which isn't as much obviously as you guys, but I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. And if he has time to stand back there and find those receivers, UNI's secondary just has no chance of keeping up with him. So, and he's also pretty good with his feet, so he can hurt you that way too. And I think that's a big key to the game. Nelly, you've seen a lot of Sam Richardson. What's your thought?
You're right. They give him time. He's got several different options. They're pretty deep at receiver. Last year is bang, bang, bang. Bundridge was down in the first 6 plays of the game, and that was their best receiver. But you got to look at Quentin Bundridge. He's back, fully healthy, and then Alan Lazard is a year removed from playing as a true freshman, 6'5" with speed. And then you have Davario Montgomery, who grew up and played football, high school prep football with Richardson. So they got a connection there, and he's 6'5" too. So they got some height there, they got some talent, and then they got some guys behind them that they're really high on too. So if they give him time, the one thing he doesn't have that he's had in the past is doesn't have an E.J. Bibbs or an Ernest Brun to throw the ball at tight end yet. They don't have that kind of receiving tight end who was another option for them, who was a lot of times was the go-to guy.
The third thing that kind of jumped out at me with this game is I think Iowa State maybe has been a little bit slow in the linebacker core in the last few years, which is really not a good problem to have in the Big 12 where the game is so fast. It looks like they've made some changes this season. I see 2 starters are not listed. Number 1 on the depth chart, they've got 3 new guys listed. What do you guys think about that? I mean, do they have enough speed now at linebacker to make plays against this type of offense?
Well, the Jordan Harris, the junior college transfer, they registered him last year. They think he was ready to play last year. He was probably their best middle linebacker last year, but he wasn't. He played too fast, but he wasn't always. He just went to the ball, and he wasn't always keeping with his assignments. This year, they say he's much more football smart. He's making the plays, and he can play downhill and fast and physical, and so he'll be in the middle. It's interesting. I don't know if Luke Knott is fully back from his hip. He's had hip surgery. He's had hip problems. Could end up derail his career. So that's interesting. And they're going to always play a smaller, like almost a safety at that third linebacker spot because they have to play so many spread offenses in the Big 12. So, hopefully they're probably planning to play a pretty fast guy there. Sorry, the name's jumping here, but Jordan Harris is supposedly an upgrade there at middle linebacker with at least the speed factor.
And Levi Peters and Jay Jones are the other two that right now are running number one on the depth chart at least.
Yeah. Levi's a go-getter. He was their top special teams guy before he blew out his knee last year. And Jay Jones they brought in as a junior college guy and to hope to play. I think we touch a fourth one is if UNI wants to have success against Iowa State, they're probably going to have to look at the recipe that worked the last 2 years. I think you mentioned it. Johnson had 200 rushing. I think North Dakota State last year rushed for almost 300 yards against the Cyclones. That defensive line is still, an unknown. They got some junior college guys in there. Yeah, they jumped down there to the junior college level, but how are they going to fare, when they get to this next level? So maybe UNI is looking for looking to make a lot of yards on the ground.
That would bring us to another thing on the UNI side is the offensive line, which is something we really haven't talked a lot about. They've had to replace some parts in there with Rummels being gone. They have Rachi back, Rothemacher's back, but can this be a cohesive unit? They had problems with that last year, not so much in the running game, although David Johnson created a lot of his own yards, but it was in the passing game. Now the question is, can they protect whoever the quarterback is, and can they open holes consistently for a back who's not likely to be able to create the things that David Johnson created? So that'll be one thing to watch is how UNI blocks guys like Damon Tucker. Can they neutralize him at least and give their skill people a chance to do some things?
Predictions?
Well, this is one of the more interesting games I think in this series, and they've all been interesting, but there are so many unknowns. I mean, Iowa State's talked all about yesterday at Paul Rhodes' press conference about motivation, how they don't want to have that same sour taste in their mouth they had of losing to NDSU and UNI in past years. They're motivated, but can they find a running back? Can Richardson have a big game? Can the defensive line gel? Can the linebackers be any good? And then on the other side, UNI has all these other things going. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, not issues, but question marks in the defensive line. So I would give the advantage to Iowa State, let's say 20-17, just based on home field.
I think, like you mentioned, David Johnson, the difference maker in their last meeting. I think Sam Richardson has potential to be that type of player in this meeting. Iowa State comes in with a solidified quarterback. I'm not sure, if that's the case with UNI, maybe a little gamesmanship there, saying all four guys are still, in the hunt to start Saturday. But you have to wonder what UNI is going to get out of that position, especially if it's not Cole Morgan. So I'd have to think, Iowa State would be about a touchdown favorite there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'd say Iowa State's probably offense is a little more deeper, despite their veteran along the line and the receiver at the quarterback. The only thing they're really rookie at is at tailback. I give them a little more offense. I'm going to reverse the score from 2 years ago. I'm going to say 28-21 Iowa State.
I have to agree. I think we've seen what Iowa State's offense can do against teams from the Big 12. It's going to be a handful for UNI to keep them under wraps. If they can keep them to less than 28 points, I think they'll have a chance to win the game, but I'm not sure they can do that. That would be a tall order with this explosive Iowa State group of receivers and Richardson. So, and Iowa State will be highly motivated, as will UNI. I mean, they certainly won't roll over for the Cyclones by any means. This is a big game for them, and their chance this season to step up to the next level and prove they belong there as well. So, I see a tight game, but I kind of give the edge to Iowa State just based on the fact that it's probably in Ames. All right, any last thoughts about that?
No, I think we've covered it. Just one more thing, that this begins a critical part of the schedule for UNI. I mean, it doesn't get much easier than this after this game. I mean, Eastern Washington comes in, and they've got to go out to Cal Poly. and then they open with NDSU and Illinois State and Valley football play. So it's not a be-all, end-all game for the Panthers, but certainly is an important one, if for no other reason than they want to stay healthy going into the rest of their schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, it's murderer's row here the first 5 weeks, and they need to find a way to get 2 or 3 or 4 wins out of this somehow. So, all right, let's move on to the Illinois State at Iowa game. Kind of another intriguing matchup. We've seen what these FCS teams are able to do against some of these FBS teams from time to time, including UNI against Iowa, and North Dakota State's had their days against that level too. So, what do you guys think about this matchup? Nellie, let's start with you.
It's a tough one for Iowa, who's got some question marks everywhere. They're starting 2 new guys in the middle of the lineup. Illinois State, I mean, their offense is explosive with Trey Robinson and is it Marshawn
Coppridge.
Yeah, both those guys too. I mean, they were in the title game last year. I think this is a difficult test for Iowa. They got some questions on defense. You wonder what you're going to get from Beathard. They say he's much more long and he's got a better grasp of offense, but he's always seemed to be a little bit of a gambler. But maybe that's going to help Iowa. Maybe he's more willing to throw the deep ball or stretch the field for Iowa if they allow him to. So a dangerous game. I think Illinois State's got a ton of players back. I think this one's going to go down to the wire.
Roberson's a handful. I think he's kind of been the missing piece for that offense. They've had a lot of talented players in the past, but he's really kind of pulled it all together and given them some dimensions that really make them tough to stop.
And I guess I missed, you look at Iowa, they're starting 2 new tackles, so that's going to be a question mark along the line. They got veteran inside, but, you're starting Ike Butker from Cedar Falls at right, and Boone Myers, who was a walk-on 2 years ago, is going to be at the left tackle, replacing Brandon Sheriff.
There's one thing I don't worry about at Iowa, it's the offensive line. I mean, they'll be productive, they'll get their job done. But what else do you guys see as keys in this game?
I think it boils down to, or to some degree at least, production from Iowa's wide receivers. That's been a question mark now for a while, and if you look at them, do they have a guy that can go down the field consistently and give them the deep ball? And the answer is maybe. We've been looking for guys for years for that, and it didn't happen last year. One of the people that was one of their deep threats last year is gone. They have Tavon Smith back, who was capable of spectacular if the UNI game is any indication. Other than that, they have a lot of guys who are good short to intermediate, guys who can catch the football, but can they get down the field and give Beathard someone to throw to? That's what we don't know yet.
Oh, that may be partly dependent on what they do in the run game too. I mean, the guys will have a little more one-on-one coverage if they prove that they can run the ball consistently. So we'll see how that plays out. Nick, your thoughts on this one?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Beathard. If he'll be given that freedom to look deep and extend the defenses and go more vertical within that offense this year. And then also it'll be interesting to see how Iowa's linebackers, like Nellie mentioned earlier, respond. Last year, obviously, David Johnson exposed a lot of teams, but he really exposed that linebacking core, I thought. And that was a tough matchup for them. Against Illinois State, I think that Iowa defense really needs to try to establish itself and get some momentum going.
Well, let's move on to some predictions for this game. My thought is that it's going to be low 90s in Iowa City, high humidity. I think Iowa's depth is a factor in this game. I don't think Illinois State can go as deep as Iowa can, with quality at least. So I see the Hawkeyes pulling out a touchdown win or so.
I think it might be close to that. I'll go with Iowa as well. I think this could be almost a replay of the game with UNI a couple of years ago where Panthers had 2 chances to win with a field goal and had both of them blocked. It may not come down to a special teams play per se, but Iowa seems to have a tough time with this sort of opener for whatever reason. They always enjoy that depth advantage, but they seem to struggle. I'm not sure if it's because they don't get up emotionally or something else is going on. And there's a little more pressure, I think, involved with this opener, given that there's a little bit of restlessness with Kirk Ferentz down there. I know the people down there that are on the point are a little bit edgy about this game. They are very respectful of Illinois State. So I'm going to say Iowa 21-20.
I don't know if it'll be that close, but I think definitely Illinois State's gonna be able to give them a game. Iowa obviously probably has a lot to prove after last season and how that ended with that disappointing showing in the bowl game. I think they're gonna really want to start off on the right foot, and I'd say probably Iowa maybe 21-10.
Yeah, I think I think Iowa's defenses, those linebackers are going to be a little bit defense are better than they were last year. A year under their belts, they were all freshmen last year. I think I like them too. I'm going to say 24-10 Iowa.
All right. So it looks like we've got the Cyclones and the Hawkeyes. Another game this week that'll be interesting. Wartburg opens against Augsburg at home. I know the Knights have extremely high expectations this season. Nellie, you've been up there, talked to Coach Willis a little bit. How do you see that game?
It's a good start for them. That Minnesota Intercollegiate Athletic Conference is a very tough, and Wartburg tries to schedule a tough preseason schedule. They got Bethel next week right after the back, one of the powerhouses from that league. So, it'll be a tough game. They lost a lot of seniors last year, but they bring back a lot too. It's amazing. I thought when I went to the presser and I started researching about it, I was like, wow, this is, I thought, boy, this team was going to be vacant because they talked about their senior class, but then you get there and they have 30 seniors this year, which they think is a record, most they've ever had in program history. And they got a lot of guys. They got some guys that are missing. They don't know who's going to be that Taylor Jacobsmeyer, who's going to play that role. I mean, he was there, do everything on offense, over 1,000 yards receiving. They don't know if they got that guy, but they might have 3 guys that can fill it. So I like it. It's a good opener. Wartburg and Augsburg and them have had some good contests, but I think Wartburg's going to take this one. I think, like I said, there's high expectations. This team, I think, could make another run in the playoffs, win a couple of games. If they get that far, they can keep Logan Schrader healthy. They are missing an All-American left tackle and Chris Brinkmeyer, so they got to replace him. So they got some there, but the defense is salty. I think they got about 8 starters back on defense, or 8 guys that started last year at one point or another and started some games. So they got a ton of, and that's where Coach. If you've seen Wartburg play, that's where Coach Wills lives and dies with his defense, making plays and playing some good defense, and then getting enough from the offense. The offense has gotten more explosive in recent years, but the defense has always been their bread and butter. I think that's where it's going to start with them. I like what the Wartburg team looks like this year.
Well, week 1 of the high school football season is also come and gone. You guys' takeaways from what you saw last Friday?
Well, I had the Cedar Falls, the Cedar Falls game, and I wasn't sure what to expect from Brad Reber and his Tigers, and they were pretty impressive. This is not the Iowa City High program of the past. It's not quite as strong. However, I would say they do have some speed. They do have some guys with some skill, and they tested Cedar Falls defense, especially its new front 7. So there's some work to do there. On the offensive side, Cedar Falls looked pretty balanced, pretty diverse. Taylor Alexander completed a high percentage of passes, did not turn the ball over. I don't think they really got maximum use out of the receivers, but that's something that can develop over time. The running game looks solid. They have a couple guys that Clausen and DeGroot that ran up the middle well, that gave them some solid performance there. And the offensive line, I think, is pretty good. I think that's going to be the key for them all year. It's going to be tough for teams to slow those guys down up front when you have a Spencer Williams who's going to Iowa. So all in all, a good start for Cedar Falls. I think Ames, from what I understand, maybe a little bit off this year, a little bit down. They lost their opener. Key test maybe the next week after that with Urbandale, and we'll see how they do there.
I was over at Dyke on Saturday for a rain-delayed game. It's kind of a unique situation with the heavy rains Friday, and the question with Dyke is they had a lot of pieces to fill on that line, and they did a great job in that traditional rivalry game against Appleton-Parkersburg. Their defensive front really shut them down. I think Appleton-Parkersburg only had 2 first downs on the first drive, and then didn't get a first down in that game until the end of the third quarter. So that's a Dyke New Hartford defense that looked really scary. They've got tons of size, and then they returned Trent Johnson, who's going to be a really special running back at that Class 1A level. He's a guy that ran just 10 yards shy of a school record last season as a sophomore, and he had one play in that game where he had a 58-yard touchdown run. It looked like he bounced off one of his blockers up from the press box, and I saw it later in the highlight tape, and he actually ran in between a blocker and defender and scampered on out, and just a tough guy to tackle, and it'll be interesting to see what type of numbers he puts up this season.
I had East High, and I don't know what you can get a true gauge. Their defense looked really good. Offense, they're going to struggle, but I don't know. The only time I didn't think it was raining on Friday night was during pregame, and then as soon as they kicked off, it just came down in waves, and it rained from the first snap to the last snap, and there was a 45-minute lightning delay, which they were leading at halftime 3-0. I think that I talked to Coach Carter afterwards, and he said or I actually saw him the next day, and he said that actually did slow some of the momentum that we had from leading at half. you know, they're gonna East is gonna be, I think, pretty good defensive wise. Offense, they got their line. They got to figure some things out. Lines. They didn't create a lot of holes. They tried to run the ball, and a lot of times their back was getting hit in the backfield. I think one time the guy tackled both the quarterback and the running back at the same time. They didn't get the handoff off. So you know, they got some things to work on there. But they said, you know, the rain took away a lot of their spread offense. So yeah, Coach Carter said so they couldn't do a lot of what they wanted to do. I think they got some good athletes that could throw the ball. They're back. They lost their. They had a two-way race. Chase Pryor and Landon Clemson, and Pryor blew out his knee in a scrimmage against Mason City a week before the opener. And so this Clemson, it looks like when he could grip the ball, he could throw a good ball. But I mean, basically, he was shot putting it because he couldn't hold on to the ball Friday night.
The other games that involved Metro teams last week, Waterloo West lost a close game. And it's hard to get a gauge on where they stand. I think they're pretty decent, but they were without their top two running backs from last year, so I'm sure that set back their running game a little bit at least. So we'll see what happens. I think they're going to be okay. And it was hard to get a handle on Columbus too, because I think Independence, they were a playoff team last year. They've kind of been building, and I think they're pretty good. So you know, Columbus may be okay down the road too. We'll see. But as usual, I mean, our Northeast Iowa is just loaded with outstanding teams. We're going to have a lot of teams to watch throughout the season and probably into the postseason with your Waverly, Shell Rock, and Gladbrook, and Janesville, and Don Bosco, and on and on and on. So it's going to be a big season for our high school football teams. Anything else about?
I think just looking at last week, that game that really stood out was kind of that Gladbrook-Rhinebeck win over a very good Union team on the road. You know, that's a Gladbrook-Rhinebeck team that was in the state championship game last year. Their quarterback got to start in the championship game in place of an injured quarterback, and he had 3 interceptions from his free safety position in that win over Union. So I think they're going to be a team that's going to really look to pick up from where they left off a year ago.
Very good. What else do you guys want to talk about today?
Well, there's one thing that was kind of interesting last week, excuse me, getting back to football at the FCS level, and that's North Dakota State's decision to go with a full cost of attendance stipend to all athletes, including football. And that sets them apart from the majority of FCS teams and everyone else in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And that wasn't exactly met with a brisk round of applause by Patty Viverito. The interesting thing to me about that was the statement by Matt Larson, the AD, who said, we're doing this because we're competing against the Minnesotas, the Wisconsins, the other FBS team, and this will give us a chance to compete. That's fine, except so is everybody else. So you wonder, even though they say they're not interested in going to FBS, if this is a step in that direction. Because if you're going to act like an FBS school, you might as well be one.
Yeah, very interesting, and you know, I don't think it's a surprise. I mean, I think everybody knew that North Dakota State or possibly an Illinois State was going to go that direction sooner rather than later. And it's, you know, North Dakota State can certainly afford it. It's $1 million expense when you expand it beyond football and you go across the board, which equity-wise and Title IX-wise is pretty much where it has to go. So it's a decision I think you and I is going to have to face here sometime in the next year or two and try to figure out if there's a way that they can keep up with the rest of the teams in the Missouri Valley Football Conference.
My question: have they waived the size of the stadium issue? I thought because how can they expand the Fargo Dome? What can they do?
Well, that would be a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that they will give you some time in the transition to do that. Coastal Carolina just announced it's going to FBS, and it will have to expand its stadium. So I don't know what NDSU might want to do or can do with Fargo Dome, but certainly they'll look at that. That would be one thing that would be a part of the decision. So, and again, let's be clear, there's been no suggestion by them that they're going to make this move. In fact, they said quite the opposite. And there's nothing illegal, ethically wrong with what they're doing. They're perfectly within the rules as they exist now. It's just that they have set themselves, again, apart from the body of FCS schools. And it's a little bit different, I think, in this regard. With the FBS level, when you're offering $6,000 as opposed to $3,000, you can make the argument if you're the $3,000 school, well, we're still offering you some benefits, some things that you won't get at the $6,000 school. But if you're the only school in your area that's offering a stipend and everyone else is getting nothing, I have to believe that's a little bit more of an incentive for some of these recruits that might be on the fence to go to NDSU as opposed to somewhere else.
Certainly. And another thing about the Division I, I mean, actually, it's not the size of the stadium. It's I did some research on this a couple of years ago, and if I remember correctly, it's based on the average attendance. You have to sell a certain number of seats, and it seems like it was like 14,000 or 15,000 or something in that range. So
I think
I
they
don't
have that covered, yeah.
I think, yeah, North Dakota State won't have any problem if that's the direction that they decide to go. But very interesting development, and probably a very disappointing development on a lot of fronts.
And one more thing too, 20 years ago yesterday, Iowa State played Ohio to open its 1995 football season. That was Dan McCarney's first game as a head coach, and the first game where Troy Davis really made a meaningful impact. He rushed for 291 yards. Iowa State came back and won it to give McCarney a victory in his debut. He's only the second Iowa State head coach to win his debut, and it's interesting since then. I think that Iowa State has entered, if you will, the modern era of its football program, because a year after that, the Big 12 began, and we've seen some of the things that have gone on since then. But certainly that was an important date in Iowa State football history.
I was there.
So was I.
All right, very good. That's going to do it for this week. Our staff will be all over this weekend covering high school and college football. And as always, you can catch all the action online at www.wcfcourier.com, as well as in our print editions. See you next week.